Hey there, everyone. I'm Dave Ferrell. I'm with the Anglers Journal and the Active Interest Media. And today I'm hosting the special edition of the Anglers Journal podcast. Um, it's a special edition because it's sponsored by Visit Fort Lauderdale. And they want everyone to know to get ready to be wowed because the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show is back. And whether you're a seasoned sailor, a passionate angler, or a yacht enthusiast, you're invited to explore the world's largest in-water boat show in the yachting capital of the world. Meet renowned yacht builders, discover the latest water toys, and indulge in dockside dining and stunning waterfront views, making unforgettable memories in and off the dock. So check out visitfortlauderdale.com/events for more details. And, you know, I'd like to introduce my guest here. He's a charter boat captain. He owns a tackle shop. He's the owner of an amazing uh, gallery. He's a great billfish artist and one of the world's foremost experts on deep dropping and trolling for swordfish, and pretty much a true Renaissance man from Hillsborough Inlet, Fort Lauderdale area, Mr. R.J. Boyle. Thanks for
That was a
coming
lot.
in here and
That's a
doing this
lot
today.
of accolades.
Well,
Well, man,
you
I'm just,
deserve it. You deserve it. So I'm glad you're here and as being an expert from that area, I have a lot of fond memories of the Hillsborough Inlet. I actually won a truck in the Pompano Beach Rodeo one time. So very, I love Hillsborough Inlet. I love Fort Lauderdale just for that reason
sure.
alone. But what was it like growing up in the Lauderdale area as a kid who just wanted to fish?
It's a great question because I think I'm one of the last natives left in the state of Florida. There's not many of us left, but when you think back to those days, when I think back to Hillsborough Inlet and I think back to the Yard Arm Marina in the
Mhm.
days when Captain Dan Garnsey owned the Helen S. And, fishing was a way of life down there. It was a
Yeah.
little different then than it is today. And I was actually my brother who got me into fishing, because he was a mate on the drift boat. And the drift boat back in the day, when you said I worked on a drift boat at Hillsborough Inlet, I mean, these guys had uniforms. They had pressed pants and they had,
Right.
white shirts that couldn't have blood on them, so everybody had their name embroidered on their chest. So it was really kind of a different way of life. And when you went to the marina in an afternoon in Fort Lauderdale or Hillsborough Inlet in this area, man, it was like the scene. There was 500 to 1,000 people dressed in suits and slacks and shirts coming from work buying fish, and the dock photographers just
Yeah.
standing there taking pictures of everybody's catches. So, man, it was a
Definitely
little
different than
different.
the
Very
furry hair and the flat bill hats that we got now.
total, yeah, it's not like that anymore. So,
Right.
yeah, very, very cool. More of a way of life now. It's just more relaxed now. It's a little different. Obviously,
Right.
real estate's different. Dock slips are more expensive. So, there's a lot more backyard boats. There's still a fishing, buzz around. But obviously, we have a charter boat at a Lighthouse Point. So, plenty of guys still fishing for a living. It just looks a little different. You know what I mean?
Right. So what were some of the first boats that you worked on? What was it
So,
like
so
down
the
there?
first boat I ever worked on was the Helen S. drift
Okay.
boat. That was Dan Garnsey was one of the captains. Bud O'Brien was another captain on there. And then when I made the transition into sport fishing, I had a relationship with Al Fields. Al Fields and Johnny Mumford owned the Bolo Jr. out of Hillsborough Inlet. So Bolo Jr. was a boat I was always around, growing up. Never really worked on that boat. I believe the first boat I ever worked on was the Miss Chief 7 with Captain Gene Feldman. And the second boat, I think it was our boat called Anytime with
Right.
Captain Gary Urini. So I worked on that boat for several years, and then hopped around on different boats at Hillsborough Inlet. So and it was when I think back to those days, it was just fishing was different. The idea of captain and mate relationship was a little different than it is today. But growing up on those boats and seeing those captains, and I always, because of my brother, being older than me, I
Right.
always had this respect for a captain. And I had this, just for me to these old time captains, man, fishing was life. And, I just always looked up to them. So it was a very, very interesting for me being around fishing when I was a kid because I admired my brother and I wanted to be in fishing and I loved it. So very cool look for me.
What kind of time frame are we talking about there then when you first started? What year were you?
When I would say it's probably, you're talking 75, 1975, 19 set between 75 and 80 is
Mhm.
really the time when I started fishing a lot.
Right.
Um, yeah, and spending a lot of time. And again, I go back to fishing here because you got to remember, whether you were in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and all the way up through Boynton at the time, it was, the Lady K out of Boynton Beach, but this whole area, South Florida area, you know, as a fisherman, you grew up on a drift boat. You really never started on a charter boat.
Right.
There was a graduation level to where once you graduated a drift boat lifestyle or you conquered that type of fishing, then you were good enough to get on. But, think about this, and I thought about this yesterday talking to someone about drift boats. When I was growing up, the drift boats went to the islands all the time. So summertime and wintertime, we were spent Chub Cay. We spent, so much time in Walkers on the drift boat.
Oh,
So
I didn't even
they'd
know
have
that.
these. Yeah, so the Helen we went to the Berry Islands, we went all over Abacos on the drift boat with 40 or 50 people. And so we grew up doing these island trips all the time on the Helen S6. So that was
Crazy.
the biggest of the three boats. So, that's where it started for me
Mhm.
with my brother. You know what I mean? I was the guy in the back corner who would win the pool and I had to give all the money to the mates, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So, you're primarily known now, besides the tackle shop and the art and everything. You're the swordfish guy. How'd you get so wrapped up with the sports?
It's so interesting because being a full-time mate, I was traveling a lot, going to the Blue Marlin circuit and Wahoo circuit. I worked on a boat called the Concrete Machine, and we did a lot of traveling. And at a point where I was having children, um, we didn't really want to travel much anymore. So when we came home back to Deerfield Beach, Lighthouse Point area, I worked on some boats locally here at the Cove Marine for Captain Mark Danley. And, we, there was a guy, John Bassett, one of my best friends today. We were going out the inlet one morning and we're in the tower because we're getting ready to go cobia fishing. And this guy, John Bassett, who's got an Ocean Master with no T-top, comes through the inlet coming in. And we look down and we look over to the side of us and there's 5 swordfish laying in the cockpit
Oh,
in his boat. And back then you didn't really see that that was a long line thing. So being able to see it, and I remember then start having a relationship with John talking about swordfish. There was a recreational boom. So going out and catching a swordfish in, let's just say, 1990,
hmm,
maybe 92. When I started sword fishing, it wasn't in the daytime, which I'm really known for. People
right,
realize, have to realize, we fished for 15 years at night, where
right,
there was this resurgence of sword fishing and swordfish tournaments. And listen, we were out there 3 to 4 nights a week to charter fishing, and you couldn't find a spot to set up. We'd have a tournament with 100 boats in it, 75 boats, in one line out off,
right.
Fort Lauderdale area. So
And there was a few tournaments going
that's
on
where
then too. A few
oh
tournaments
my
as
gosh,
well.
it was
Yeah.
amazing. A lot of tournaments. So we'd sit there and we'd have these tournaments at night. Long story short, several years later, the Stanzics down in the Keys
Hmm.
caught the first daytime swordfish in the modern day era, not
Hmm.
Venezuela because they've been caught before,
That's
but
where I did
they
it.
actually had. There you did it. Okay, so
Yeah.
So and again, like to think that as a human being, we couldn't catch the swords in the day that we were catching at night. It's so crazy to think, why didn't we? But it was this whole thing, oh, there's too much current, you can't do that. And it was really crazy. Anyway, they caught the first one. I caught wind of the one that they caught, and I
Yeah.
started doing it up here off of Fort Lauderdale, and immediately had success. And then that was the time, maybe it was 2000, really about 2008, that I was really heavily into it, and there was nobody doing it. And I
Right.
got a permit, at least a permit. Well, we got to remember 2008 and a half, we had the recession. And so I have a tackle store, and I couldn't really afford to pay me and the other main guy. So I started really getting good at sword fishing and paying my way by having that permit.
Hmm.
And so, and learning every day, and there was not a soul out there fishing. And whether that was the tackle, the rig, the technique, the way that we fished, or all of that came from that 2006 to 2010 time frame, where the tackle and the rods, man, we figured out what we needed to have, and that the bub was there, and we were catching big fish. We had never seen anything like, these 3, 4, 500 pound fish at night. Biggest
Right.
fish we had in a 10 or 12 year span might have been 300 at night. So that's where it started in that time frame. So, and I still got the disease. It's
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really bad.
Well, well, luckily you do, because it's a very highly technical fishing, especially where you live, because of all the current and the depths that you're doing it. It is weird that we didn't realize that during the daytime all the swordfish were on the bottom, because at night
Yeah.
they come to the top and they're dispersed around, but in the daytime they're all down there on the bottom, most of them, and they're concentrated. And if you can get a bait down there, where they are, through all that current and wind and
Yeah.
everything else that you guys deal with, which is depth, and which is really tough. You're one of the masters of that, and congratulations on figuring all that out. Because I've
Yeah.
been like 3 or 4 times with guys like you, and I still can't figure it out after watching it. It's just very, very difficult, in my opinion. And that little tiny bite that you sit there staring at that rod tip waiting on, man, it's just a
Yeah.
little tick, tick, tick. Oh my gosh, we got one on. I say, you're kidding me. You're kidding me. That's it. And then
It's
the
great, isn't
battle
it?
begins. That's
Mhm.
the rough part, is getting that joker up off the bottom.
That's
How
right.
did the
That's
electric
right.
reels help you guys out with all that?
You know, so the truth be told, I was the first one to use the LP, modern day Lindgren Pittman, for sword fishing.
Right.
It came on the scene around that time, had been out for a few years as a deep drop reel for meat, fish, snapper, grouper, but in sword fishing, that was the go-to reel.
Hmm.
And I started using that reel, and obviously because of the current. Now, one of the beauties here, I'll tell you, in South Florida, you hit it on the head. We have an average of a 3.5 to a 4 knot tide current moving water off of South Florida, and it always moves to the north. So it really creates a difficult aspect to fishing. When we go to other places in the world, it's like fishing in a swimming pool. We don't
Yeah.
really use electric reels. If it was up to me, I wouldn't use an electric reel.
Right.
So these other places that we go, we've been lucky enough to catch a couple different records. One being the most caught at night on rod and reel off South Florida. We caught 13 one night, and in the daytime we caught 21 off Texas. And so in one day. So
Right.
when you go to these different places that have different currents, you can not use an electric reel, and there's this. Sometimes there's a negativity towards people who don't get it really. So
Right.
electric reels, or electric reel fishing off South Florida, it's not an option. At times you can't fish any other way. So,
Right.
you know,
You have to
and
use
I
you
don't.
have to use such heavy weights, but to get through all that current and stuff. And
Yeah,
if you're having to hand crank up all that weight several times, it can get brutal.
brutal, absolutely brutal. So yeah, we use the electric reel because we have to at times, Dave.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I first deep dropped in Venezuela probably around 95, 96, somewhere in there, and there was no current. We used a
So
balloon, and a big peanut balloon, the long
yeah,
balloons, and it would float horizontal, I mean, vertically in the water. And when the balloon floated horizontal on the surface, we had one on, and you just start cranking. and a lot of times they would come straight up, and I think because they didn't have that whole much current to mess with down there, and they would
Yeah.
come up. And a swordfish is just like a person. They all have different personalities. Sometimes they'll come flying to the surface, and sometimes they don't come up for nothing in the world, and it takes forever to get them up there. So
That's right, for
pretty
sure.
crazy.
Yes.
So
Uh,
what's your favorite time of year to fish down in there? What's your for
Me, I'll tell you
everything, not
what,
only swordfish, but for all the species?
man, I'm going to tell you something. The beauty of Fort Lauderdale, you think about, you know, there's a season for everything here. And having one thing that man, it's difficult because those sword fishing is year round. We catch swords year round. It's every single month when we go back to our logbooks, there might be little ebbs and flows to the amount of catches, but sword fishing for me is the best year round. When you look at wahoo, which we really specialize in, a lot of wahoo fishing off our coast now, you're
Right.
talking really almost a year round thing now, but the winter months being the best for consistency, December, January through March. But then what you notice now with wahoo fishing, which we love, is when the bonitas show up in the summertime, like right now, and we're stockpiling bait for the season. When we're catching bonita, that's when you catch your biggest wahoos. So
Yeah.
they're here. And so over the last 2 weeks, we've caught 3 wahoos over 50 pounds,
Nice.
trolling planers, in 200 to 300 feet of water with customers. So really, if you said sailfish, oh, I want to catch a sailfish in South Florida,
Hmm.
you automatically think, well, wintertime's the best for that. But the truth is, a couple months in the summer is really good for sailfish too.
They're having a great sailfish bite right now as we
I
speak
know it.
in
It's
the middle of the
absolutely.
summer.
That's right. Exactly. So really, are there seasons? Really, if you said there's a season for things, but the best, right now is snapper time. When you get into summertime, you talk about anchoring up, you talk about catching yellowtails and mutton snappers on the full moon, which is what we've been doing a lot right now. I've been really getting into some bottom fishing. I've been really giving the swords a break and deep dropping and really getting good at snapper fishing. And so when you see this, and what's beautiful about it is it's flat calm in the summer. So you got to love that. And you and I aren't getting any younger, so it's nice when we can get some flat calm
Yes,
seas,
that's
and we
correct.
can, we can go fishing and it's flat and you just enjoy it. There's that, those afternoon showers in Fort Lauderdale, and then all of a sudden everything gets still, and there's kingfisher biting and a flat line's going off. And so
Right.
yeah, there's so much to it down here, and we're so lucky to be in this area because somebody said to me the other day, like, where do you really like being in South Florida? I said, man, let me tell you something. In an hour, I can be in the Keys. I can be in Stewart where they catch tons of sailfish. I can be in the Everglades catching tarpon and snow. I mean, I can go be in the Bahamas in 2 hours catching cubera snapper like we did last week, 50-pound cuberas bottom fishing during the mutton spawn. So in a 1 to 2 hour span, I get the best of everything. So being here where we are, best.
Yeah, you mentioned the Everglades and the snook and the tarpon and that stuff. Do you do much inshore fishing?
You know, I wish I could do more. You know what? My old captain, Captain Bill McMurray, who was a hardcore fisherman, saltwater guy, offshore guy, but man, he used to have a trailer in Chokoloskee, and we spent a lot of time in Chokoloskee fishing with him. And I really, man, when you get detached around some of these mangroves and with Brian Sanders and some of the other guys I fished with, man, there's such a solace and such a separation and just like Jurassic Park for fish back there with the
Right.
white pelicans. And, unfortunately, I don't get to do that because I'm always either booked and doing it. But man, let me tell you, and I was telling a guy yesterday about Chokoloskee, and I know you're a big backwater guy. Man, I would never take a boat out in Chokoloskee because of the shiftiness and I'm so afraid to fish back there.
Yeah.
But it's like, and I used to say, if you could snap your fingers and the water was clear, you probably never fish over here
Oh,
with
I'm
the amount
telling
of the sharks and stuff that are the giant sharks and all the life that's there. Scary place if you don't really know. You know what I mean? So
you. Right. And plus,
wonderful
you can
fish.
get lost back in there.
Every corner looks the same.
Everything looks the same back in there.
Absolutely, man, for
Well,
sure.
you mentioned, you were booked a lot. You also own that charter boat. Tell us a little bit about that operation and, some of the people you fish with.
Right. Growing up, one of the charters as a mate, I worked for a captain. His name is Mark Danley, Captain Mark Danley. Mark Danley worked out of Hillsborough his whole life, but he traveled. He was a mate in Oregon Inlet for several years. Brenner Parks and some of these other guys, big wigs up in North Carolina, really good fishermen. And then I went to work for Mark after the concrete machine because I wanted to stay home with my family. And uh, out of the Cove Marina. And I worked for Mark for almost 4 years. Well, 5 years ago, I was in the shop, and Mark, being one of our customers, came in and said he was ready to make a move and after being on a boat for 12 or 15 years. And I said, well, what are you going to do? He says, I don't really know. I said, how much money did you lose? Because as a charter boat, they all lose unless you're an owner operator of a charter boat. Charter boats don't make any money.
Right.
So he said, I really don't know, but you can talk to my boss and he'll tell you. Long story short, um, we did the numbers on the program, and Mark does so many trips and has been here so long that it's really almost this. He's one of the only guys that you can have a break even program by doing charters. So because I film so much doing instructional videos for the crew platform, I said, you know what? It'd be nice to have a good platform. Let's go out and buy a boat, and you can be the captain. We'll get a mate, and we started this 5 years ago. We have a 44 sport fish called the Lisa B out of Lighthouse Point Yacht Club, and in 5 years, because of our connections, we're able to break even. We take people out. I think we do right over 200 trips a year,
Oh,
200
that's a
days.
lot.
So 200 days a year is a lot. And Mark is as into it now as he was. Well, I mean, this is the guy. Like when you think about charter boats, you think, oh, the captain. He goes out and they ride around. He is so. The beauty is he's more fired up now than he was back then. And this guy wants to catch fish. So the cool thing about our charter program is, Dave, is that 80%, 80 or 90% of our customers are all repeat or word of mouth. It's, we're in a place at Lighthouse Point Yacht Club. There's no walk up business.
Right.
Everybody, and the beauty of social media these days is, 3 or 4 days a week when you throw up 2 or 3 wahoos, a sailfish, a box full of dolphin, and a limited kingfish, the phone rings.
Yeah.
So
they seek you out.
they do, and it's great, man. And we're doing trips and we're paying for the boat. And it's a break-even deal at best, and for us it works. You know what I mean? Some people need a write-off, so a lot of the charter boats that you've seen in the past, it was okay for them to lose some money. But a guy said to me 2 days ago, how do these guys actually make money doing charter fishing in South Florida? One of two ways. You are an owner operator, whereas if I owned the boat and I was the captain of the boat, I could actually make it a wage above.
Right.
But if you're not doing it, and that's one of the ways to do it. The other ways is to be a backyard boat. You see this a lot now in charter fishing, especially in South Florida. There's these booking agencies that book boats, and the boats sit behind somebody's house. They don't have to pay rent at a dock place, and they pick a guy up at a public ramp.
Yeah.
So all of those expenses are not there when it comes to the chart, and that's what makes or breaks you. So small boat fishing is a way to be able to do that. The big boat fishing where you got to rent a slip at a dub marina, tough to make a living, but we're doing it, and it's exciting.
That's awesome. Just want to remind everybody that this episode is brought to you by Visit Fort Lauderdale, and that's really cool that you're getting to do that and go out there and a typical day's fishing for you guys. Do you do mostly trolling? I heard you were talking about wahoos and kingfish and whatnot. Or are you doing kite fishing?
Yeah. So what's interesting about out here, we're doing really predominantly trolling, planer fishing, 2 planers, a short and a long, 4 top baits, 2 teasers, and we usually break it up. So the first hour will be trolling, trying to catch a wahoo right off the bat. At that point, if we know or we see a nice edge, or usually we're prepared with live bait to put a kite out. You know, later on in the trip, if the trip's been slow, we're dropping on wrecks. So you're
Yes.
going from trolling to kite fishing to dropping for vermilion snappers just to get a, to fill a box or to put a catch together. So one thing I gotta say about South Florida and Fort Lauderdale, this area, when you look at captains and mates and boats that are established over these years, worldwide, if you were in Venezuela or Hawaii, most of the best guys worldwide come from South Florida.
We're right. Yeah.
And everybody says, why is that? Why are all these guys originally from here? And here's the truth of it. When you have to make a living in a place like this, a mate on a boat is so talented after a few years because of trying to put a catch together. They're planer fishing, they're wreck fishing, we're dolphin fishing, we're mahi fishing, we're sword fishing. The amount of ability that you have to have just to be a good mate makes you valuable worldwide in some of these other things. Now, you go to Hawaii, most of the time they put out 3 or 4 lures,
Trolling
couple
4 lures
teasers,
all
and drive
day, not
around.
learning much.
And so, you look at kite fishing and all of these things, a South Florida mate, or man, going to another place is like, wait a minute, this is it. We just put out these lures and data. So again, that's why you see, that the South Florida charter guys excel worldwide. And man, it's really cool to see. And I'm just proud to be part of it, grow up in it. Remember, like I said,
I got you. Well, I want to finish up a little bit with, your artistry. You're a very skilled artist. You make beautiful stuff on the swordfish bills and other things. How'd you get into that?
Gosh, I tell you, my mom was really into art when I was a kid, man. She was really more crafty. She wasn't like, she used to do a lot of macrame
My mom
and,
too.
oh, yeah, and back then, she had macrame and needlepoint in certain types of things, and I, watching her do that and coming up, and then I would start, drawing at the table while she was doing macrame, and then she got me. I would say, man, maybe I was 7 or 8, 9 years old. I started going to the Boca Museum of Art where they had basic drawing classes. So I took several years of drawing, basic drawing. Then I had some private lessons with a guy named Creatori was his last name, an art instructor. And so where I started painting for the first time. But I've always loved artwork. I loved looking at other people's art. I liked all different styles of art. Loved to see watercolors and, black and white illustration, book illustration, abstract style. So growing up, I always loved art. And I was then, you get into, let's say, grade school and you start doing cartoons and fun drawings and funny stuff. And I was still drawing. And then when I got in, even though I was a baseball player and that was my focus in college, I was an art major.
Okay.
And, you had to take classes you really didn't want to in art at that time. But I'll tell you when it really started when I was at the Cove Marina with Mark and I had to stay at the boat. One of the requirements as a mate was you had to stay at the boat to book charters. It wasn't like you could just come down. So if we didn't have a charter, here I was in the salon of a boat. And I brought a sketch pad and I started doing sketches and I'd sit there and I'd do these black and white sketches. And the other guys would be like, man, how much you want for that?
That's cool.
I don't know, give me 50, I'll take 50. And so I'll never forget, I didn't really have any money. And I was sitting in the boat one day. I said, man, that's a really good sailfish drawing, if I don't say so myself. And I said,